Now there's still a little more to 1.1. So we've well and truly covered different approaches, and that depends on different contexts, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's on a panel somewhere. So look, we've well and truly covered the different approaches now. So now we're talking about confirming these approaches according to the relevant assessment system policies and procedures. So a lot of these performance criterion in element 1, when we're preparing for validation, tend to cross over each other, because 1.3 says arrange materials for validation activities. So one of the materials is going to be the RTO's policy, because that's going to contain 1.1's assessment system policies and procedures. So we're looking now at Evoke's current policy, and in here we have a section on validation. And this is a little table that breaks up the differences and information about validation and moderation. And when we go down, you'll actually see that there's some validation tools for that process. So when we're validating, we actually use the validate assessment tools, and when we're moderating, we have a moderation report. Now there's a third validation tool, and that's called Validate Systems, and that's available for staff when we want to sit down at a staff meeting and look at the organisational structure and procedures as well. So it's important at this stage just to quickly touch on that. So are the standards being met? So will we pass audit? So you can actually apply the esquire self-assessment checklist for that and report to the staff on that. You want to check that the assessors believe that they're having easy access to the current versions of documents, so that's a procedural thing. So can they access our current policy? Do they know what version? Do they know how to check that? Can they access our training and assessment strategy? Have they got the current version? That type of thing. Assessors can effectively locate information in the policy manual and training and assessment strategy. So we might be wanting to check that they can effectively navigate those documents when they find them. Checking, we touched on before, the recording and reporting procedures. So, you know, especially at that transition time when you have to start loosening control and, you know, starting to delegate responsibilities there. Directors are accessible and supportive of reasonable assessor requirements. So that's about consultation again, when assessors say, listen, we need some more resources, or we want to do this differently. That things like this type of validating systems event is occurring. Also for staff complaints or grievances, as well as for the learners' complaints and grievances, that process is covered in the policy, that all staff know what that is, and that any grievance is handled fairly and also quickly. That there is a culture that values equity, that we have a culture that all people are treated with dignity and respect. And finally, that we're checking the safety systems, that the staff know how to report hazards, that hazards are given a control so they're low risk, and that staff feel that they're working in a safe environment. So the policy also points to SNR 15.5, assessment and recognise prior learning. So this is where you would be turning to your policy manual for the processes and policies around assessment and RPL. So staff would prepare for validation by having that RTO policy manual available. 1.2 talks about analysing the relevant benchmarks for assessment. So the benchmarks are what we were looking at earlier, which was the units of competency. It is in VET all about the benchmarks, all of the components within the unit of competency, so you would be armed with those units. In some circumstances, it might be performance specifications. So if we're working with a company, we've got our unit of competency, plus we've got the specified application of that when we've contextualized it for their workplace, and we've got their standard operating procedure as well. So we're actually sitting around with their standard operating procedures and making sure that their candidates are meeting the benchmarks.